The professional discussion is a central part of every moderation visit. When handled effectively, it is a supportive yet challenging process which allows teachers to articulate their understanding of the standards and of the teacher assessment frameworks. It also allows moderators to feel confident in the judgments awarded. It is the chance to talk through and validate pupils' written evidence which supports teachers' assessment judgments for writing. It should provide a shared understanding of how judgments have been reached and the opportunity to discuss any gaps in evidence against the teacher assessment frameworks. This short video will focus on a scenario that you may encounter during a moderation visit. Having reviewed evidence, the moderator must challenge the standard awarded to a Key Stage 1 pupil. They will follow a line of inquiry to collect evidence and demonstrate how to handle a potentially difficult conversation. The professional discussion should pinpoint evidence and ensure clarity. Finally, it should allow moderators to feel confident in validating the judgments awarded and ensure that they are consistent with national standards. In this scenario, the moderator has had time to independently review a collection of writing. The teacher has judged the pupil to be working at greater depth standard, but the moderator requires additional evidence in order to validate the judgment. Evidence will consist of examples of pupils' work and the teacher's knowledge of this pupil. Please note that the pupil work discussed in this training does not represent a full collection, and not all statements within the framework are explored. The discussion represents a snapshot of a wider dialogue. It's important to remember that each set of pupil work must consistently demonstrate attainment against all of the pupil can statements within a standard in order to be validated. Skillful questioning is integral to the professional discussion. Moderators must avoid a dominance of talk and ensure that they ask open questions which encourage expanded responses, thus promoting a more constructive dialogue. Moderation visits will, at some point, present difficult discussions. How you open up this discussion is important. For this scenario, where the moderator is not yet convinced of the greater depth standard awarded, consider how you might approach this situation. How would you encourage the teacher to articulate their understanding of the statements that led to the judgment? Now is a good time to pause the video and discuss. Now you have considered your approach, watch the video to see how the discussion opens up.
So I'd like to have a look a little bit more closely at this pupil who you've judged at working at greater depth. Can you just tell me a little bit about them?
Yeah, historically he's a high attainer, very good reader, always engaged in whatever we're doing. Lovely boy, he does see that through the work as well.
And I agree, actually, we've got some really strong things in there. I can see from handwriting, looking through the collection, that we can tick off the point for the diagonal and horizontal strokes. Spelling throughout is really consistent. We can spell most common exception words correctly. But I'm interested in just drawing back to this first point on the assessment framework, write effectively and coherently for different purposes, drawing on their reading to inform the vocabulary and grammar of their writing. Can you just talk to me about that and where you think that this child's maybe done that?
Yeah, well, coherence is all about joining their ideas together, isn't it? Through the sentences, through the pieces of work. You can see here, he's using conjunctions, using because, just to join those clauses there. It just makes sense throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see there's definitely some evidence of that. What I'd like to see is more evidence of that throughout the collection. So shall we have a look together?
Yeah. At the outset, the teacher uses unsubstantiated phrases. So the moderator encourages a systematic approach, referring back to the framework and the standards regularly. This is important in building up cumulative evidence towards the judgment and ensures that there is enough evidence to support these decisions. Equally important is the collaborative approach demonstrated, as the moderator guides the teacher to the next step. Moderation is not a box-ticking exercise, but an opportunity to promote rich dialogue and a shared, consistent understanding of the framework statements and of how judgments have been reached. Now let's see how the discussion continues.
So here, look, we've got adverbials that are starting sentences. In this one, we've got pronouns to link those ideas together.
Can I just slow you down? Let's go back to the very beginning, shall we? Let's work systematically. We'll look at the first piece first, and then we'll go through and look at the others.
So it's a nice way to start your sentence, isn't it? When the wolves walked through the woods, they were walking down the path. That's a really nice way to join those ideas.
And we have got some lovely vocabulary throughout it. I'm just thinking about the start of it. Once upon a time, there were 3 little wolves and they lived in their mummy's house. We've stuck very, very rigidly sort of to the original story, haven't we? I'm wondering whether we've got enough evidence to show that they're writing effectively and drawing on their wider reading to inform their vocabulary and thinking about the audience of their writing.
Okay. Here I can see that he has drawn on his reading. I remember reading it last week actually. Iron bars, barbed wire, so showing that wider reading for me.
So we've got some knowledge of other things that we've brought into it. I'm just wondering here, we've got the commas obviously for in a list, but we've not quite used them accurately. There's some opportunities that is maybe not expanded on with these ideas. We've kind of stopped the sentence quite abruptly here and not expanded on it. Maybe we would expect to see that for greater depth. Maybe now would be a good time to have a look at the exemplification materials and have a look through.
The moderator encourages a systematic approach and works with the teacher to gather evidence of coherence from the pupil's writing. They regularly refer to the framework and exemplification materials to support understanding and aid comparison. The scrutiny is done systematically and highlights a shortfall in consistent evidence of aspects of the greater depth standard. In order for a standard to be met, all of the statements must be evidenced.
So now we've had a look through the collections together, and obviously we can see there's some really good positives in there. We've got some really good vocabulary, and looking at the greater depth statements, we can definitely say that they've met the diagonal and horizontal strokes needed to join. The spelling for common exception words is really good throughout. What I'm struggling with is not being able to see the consistency throughout the pieces to be able to meet the writing effectively and coherently for different purposes, drawing on their reading, and the punctuation mostly correctly. Whilst we can see that it's in many of the pieces, I'm not seeing that in most of the pieces to be able to say that it's consistent.
But we've got things like here, look, subordination, that's showing that added detail. The tree on the edge of a beautiful giant rainforest, that's showing that detail as well. You know, you've got prepositional phrases there.
And whilst that's showing that in some of the pieces we're seeing it, we're not necessarily seeing it consistently. If we go back to here, look, and write effectively and coherently for the different purposes, I'm not sure we're seeing enough evidence of that one. And again, if we look at the punctuation taught at Key Stage 1 mostly correctly, there's lots of really good elements of greater depths, and we've started to see that throughout, but then there's other pieces that do need some development.
But he's my highest flyer, he's my best writer, he's always got an awareness of the reader. I really think he's greater depth.
And as he may well be your best writer, and I appreciate that, and that's really difficult, but he hasn't met all of these marks for working at greater depth consistently enough to be able to say that that's where he is. He has, however, got to working at the expected, and I think that's something to celebrate.
Here, the moderator handles the situation in a positive, factual way, emphasising the key importance of consistency across the collection of work in order to validate a judgement. In this case, it's becoming clear that the evidence for greater depth standard cannot be substantiated. In the next clip, the moderator questions the independence of some pieces of writing across the collection.
Another thing I just wanted to discuss whilst we were coming to this decision is this specific piece of work. I can see you've got a very specific success criteria at the top here, and there are a few of these phrases that we've seen across other pupils as well, specifically to do with coherence.
Yeah, I did ask them to make sure they included specific elements. So you've got your rhetorical questions there. I have said to them to include those types of things. This sentence structure here, similar. So yeah, you will have seen them across several collections.
So do you agree with regards to this piece that we need to use caution when looking at that greater depth statement about writing effectively and coherently, as it's been quite heavily scaffolded?
Yeah, I do.
And we can use this piece for other elements in terms of the handwriting and some of the spelling and punctuation. That obviously can still be judged in that piece. And what we have seen across the collection is evidence of coherence for the expected standard that we can judge those pieces for.
Yeah.
Through discussion, both agree that the pupil is beginning to show some evidence of the greater depth standard, but is not there yet. Work scrutiny has shown secure evidence to meet the expected standard. Through careful questioning and a strategic review of pupil writing against the pupil can statements, a collaborative line of inquiry has begun to highlight some gaps in the pupil's writing for the greater depth standard. These clips provide only a snapshot of the full discussion. Further discussion continues and focuses on the relevant statements for the expected standard and some at greater depth. The moderation discussion is systematic and analyses written evidence against the expected and greater depth standards. Additional work is also reviewed. Despite this, the greater depth standard is not evidenced consistently and a number of statements are not fully met. This suggests that the pupil has not demonstrated the potential to meet all requirements for this standard before the deadline for data submission. Therefore, this pupil is not a candidate for remoderation. The teacher and moderator agree that this pupil is working securely at the expected standard. In order for judgments to be reached and for them to be evidence-based, consistency through a systematic approach and clarity in discussion is key. As a moderator, you must use your excellent understanding of the frameworks to support and guide teachers in referencing the statements and standards. It must be acknowledged that education has faced unprecedented challenges and experienced significant periods of change. It is therefore likely that the writing teachers and moderators may see going forward could be different to that which has been seen in previous years. With this in mind, it's essential to remember that the standards remain the standards and they have not changed. To achieve equity and consistency in assessment across schools in England, you, as moderators, must reiterate these key messages so that pupils' performance can be judged fairly and compared to national expectations.